Hello, and welcome to BI Basics 102, Delivering Business Intelligence. This video is going to talk about the different ways of delivering BI data to an organization. There are a number of ways to do this, and it really depends on the needs of the users, and different levels of users often have different needs in how they need to see the data. So I'm Craig Utley, and I'll take you through delivering business intelligence and actually show you an example of a number of different ways of delivering BI to the organization. One of the things to understand first is the goal or the challenge that businesses have when it comes to BI. The goal behind BI is to deliver benefits to the organization so that they can make more informed decisions faster. That's really what BI is all about. But there's no best way to work with the data. For example, executives need a much different way of working with data than analysts do. And people out in the front lines working with customers have yet very different needs for the data as well. So it may all be the same data, but the way that they use it and interact with it are completely different. So a BI solution encompasses not just building the data warehouse and getting those pieces ready, but also delivering it in an effective manner to people throughout the organization. So to talk first about the users of BI, it helps to understand who they are and what their needs for the data look like. So in this video, I'll be talking about several different kinds of users. First are executives and business decision makers, or BDMs for short. And I'll describe each one of these categories coming up and what their needs for the data look like. But first, executives and business decision makers, then information workers, analysts, line workers, and then external customers and vendors. Now again, even among these groups, there's no single way that is correct for delivering the data. There are multiple ways, but there are tools that work better for some of these categories than others. So the first group to talk about here are the executives and business decision makers. Now these are the people that typically are looking at either the entire organization, that would be the executives of course, or managers and people who have the ability basically to allocate funds. They hold the purse strings, if you will. They can hire and fire employees, they manage budgets, and they're making decisions that directly impact the bottom line of the organization. And most of these executives and business decision makers just need a very high level view of the data. And this is important because they don't have a lot of time to do their own analysis. That doesn't mean that they're not smart enough to do it, it's just a time issue. So usually they need to be able to very quickly grasp the health of the organization, take a look at it, often from a very high level, and understand what is going on. And if there are problems, then they will turn to someone else on their staff to investigate that problem and discover what is going on. So generally, for people at this level, there are two tools that are used, which are scorecards and dashboards. And just because I say that these tools are used at this level doesn't mean they're not useful at lower levels. As I talk about other kinds of users, just understand that scorecards can be effective at almost any level of the organization. So basically, the tools that you see at higher levels may apply lower as well. So first of all, I'll start talking about scorecards. Now, scorecards give an overview of the health of an organization or of a particular division or even down to an individual user. So for example, you may have a scorecard that covers the entire organization. It shows overall sales and other kinds of financial metrics. It might show information about customers as far as customer retention or growth in new customers and so forth. It might show employee metrics, turnover rates, and customer or employee satisfaction ratings and so forth. And these scorecards are very much like report cards that some people take home from school when they're going to school. When you would bring home a report card, your parents didn't see each individual grade that you got on every paper and test and so forth. They just saw an overall score for that class. And it gave them an indication for how well you were doing in that particular class. And so in a glance, they could get an overview of how you were doing in school, period. So that's kind of the idea behind a scorecard. Executives, again, don't have time necessarily to do deep analysis, but in one quick glance, they can understand what is going well in the organization and what is not, and then they can apply resources to looking into problems where they might see them. Now, related to scorecards are dashboards, and dashboards are really used interchangeably a lot with scorecards, but basically a dashboard is one or more scorecards and one or more reports. Now, a lot of people think about SharePoint when you start using the term dashboard, and SharePoint can certainly host a dashboard, and it's interesting because a SharePoint dashboard can let you include other things as well, email or your calendar and so forth. So a dashboard can contain more than just an individual scorecard. So dashboards are a really good entry point a lot of times for people who want to do some kind of analysis. But enough of my talking. Why don't we actually take a look at what a scorecard and a dashboard might be for an organization. Here is an example of a very simplistic scorecard. Actually, this is a special type of scorecard called a balanced scorecard, but again, it is a very simplistic version. You'll notice that there are 4 major categories that are highlighted: financial, customer, growth and learning, and internal process. I'll talk more about balanced scorecards in a future video, but basically a balanced scorecard will always have these 4 areas and then various metrics within each one. Here you can see that the financial metrics, or KPIs as they're called, key performance indicators, are sales and then the expense to revenue ratio. And then you have some additional ones: customer satisfaction and customer retention, job satisfaction, employee turnover, average training hours, and so forth. These metrics together would represent the overall health of this particular organization. And you can see that at the top there is an overall business indicator that is yellow. Obviously that's in the middle. Green is good, red is bad, and then yellow is somewhere in the middle. And then within each section you can see, for example, that the financial perspective, as it's called, is yellow. Both of the indicators in it are yellow, and these are simply how actual compares to target. Now, scorecards don't have to look exactly like this. Some people choose not to show the actual target value. They'll just show the indicator there. They may choose to show the actual value or not. It's also possible to actually show a score, and that can be useful sometimes for ranking of items. Here it didn't make a whole lot of sense. You'll notice too that within each of these perspectives it's possible to collapse and expand. This particular tool, of course, is performance point scorecards, so I will simply click on the toolbar and collapse all of those into a single item, and then I can expand that, and notice I could collapse each perspective as well to get a quicker overview. You notice, of course, that growth and learning is red. If I expand that, there are 2 indicators that are red, which is off target, and then one that is yellow, which is slightly off target. And of course those roll up into a red. You can control how it rolls up to a degree by giving the items under each heading a different weight, but here I haven't worried about that. This financial perspective, actually these are coming from one of the sample cubes provided by Microsoft, one of the sample data sets. The rest of these I just hard-coded for this example. So this is what a simple scorecard might look like. Now, I have another page, and this also has a relatively simple scorecard, but it's a little bit different. You'll notice, for example, that I have broken it down by salesperson, and so the KPIs, the metrics, are repeated for each salesperson. There's a sales and gross profit margin for each of the 10 salespeople. But what that does is it allows me to basically see the same information for everyone. The values are filtered. And so you'll notice, for example, that David Campbell is yellow on sales but green on gross profit margin. And the way this is done is that it rolls up into a green indicator. Now again, you could assign weights to say, if one's green and one's yellow, I want to add more weight to the sales, for example, and the gross profit margin. It should not roll up to be green in that case. You'll notice some others might make more logical sense. Here's one with one green and one red. It rolls up into yellow, which would make sense most of the time. You'll notice as well that not only do I have actual and target, but I have a score out to the right of this. Again, a future video will discuss how those scores are calculated. But notice if I go through and collapse all of these, it becomes a very quick way to say who are my top and bottom salespeople. And in fact, you can sort by target, not the way I've set it up, but it is possible to do that so that you could actually rank these in the order of their performance. Now, this is actually a dashboard because I have more than just this particular scorecard. I actually have a report, and if I were to click on, for example, sales for David Campbell, you'll see a report appear on the right-hand side. And this is actually a live report. I can drill down on it, for example, to get additional information. The gross profit margin shows a different kind of report, shows just a grid layout. And again, here I can expand and collapse information to get additional levels of detail for this. You'll notice as well that there is a slicer at the top, a parameter, and if I drop this down, I'm currently looking at data for all periods, but it is possible for me to filter that down. Notice, for example, that David Campbell's sales are 3.7 million for all periods, but if I want to look at just what has he done for me lately, I'll click on the calendar year 2008, and you'll notice that it drops to 674,000. The reports also are tied to that filter, and therefore they show only the data for whatever the filter has chosen. So those are a couple of examples of some very simple scorecards, and now a dashboard that includes a scorecard and then a couple of reports that switch back and forth. After discussing executives and business decision makers, the next category of people to talk about are information workers. And this is most workers in an organization, at least in the white collar area, the office area. They're not managers. They may not have control of a budget, but they do have need for information. They're knowledge workers. They work with data. They have some type of analyst or development type position, and they need to work with data as part of their normal job. So they're professionals, non-management, and generally they're going to need more detail than is given in a simple scorecard. They need lower levels of information in order to do their job. So it's not that scorecards aren't useful to them, but a lot of times their needs can be met with reports. And reports may be as simple as grids and charts, the standard rows and columns of data, or there might be some additional, more powerful types of reports that I'll show you later in this video that come with analytic applications. We'll talk more about that. Now, these reports may be based on the multidimensional cubes or the relational data warehouse. The data is the same. It's simply how it's laid out and how it's accessed. And these reports may be static, or they may include some type of interactivity. I'll show you an example of that in just a moment. Now, these reports may contain parameters. The drop down that you saw on the scorecard, you may have the same thing with a report. And the interactivity may also include some very limited ability to drill up and drill down or expand and collapse, as it's often called, with reports. So for most people in an organization, reports actually typically work really well. They have a very broad reach throughout a business. So let me show you an example of what a very simple BI report might look like. Here is an example of a very simple report that was done in SQL Server Reporting Services, and it's accessing the same cube that was being used by the scorecards and then the reports that you saw on the dashboards earlier. In this particular report, you'll notice that you have time across the top as the column headers, and then in this case you have geography, countries, as the row headers. In addition, you have a category for products parameter at the top of the report. So first of all, this report obviously contains just some very simplistic information. There are no subtotals on it, but there could be. That's relatively easy to do. In addition, there's a little bit of formatting with some colors and formatting the numbers to show dollar signs and just dropping off the decimals and so forth. But with the interactivity, first of all, notice that right now we're looking at all products, and I can use this parameter to say, okay, for example, I want to look at only accessories data. So by choosing accessories and clicking View Report, then you'll notice the data going back and changing. And we've only been selling accessories in the last 2 years, so the earlier years drop out. Now, I can make multiple selections here. I can say, well, show me the sum of accessories and clothing, for example, and you'll notice the numbers change here when I do that. Now, I'll go back to select all, and actually just all products. That's all I'm interested in at the moment. And the additional interactivity with this report is that I can choose, for example, a country and drill down to a lower level of detail. In this case, I see the states or provinces within these countries. I can do the same thing with time, for example. I can say, okay, well, I have the calendar year of 2008. Now show me the quarterly breakdown, and notice in 2008 I only have the first 3 quarters of information so far. But the data is changing dynamically to show me these new values as I expand and collapse. This, again, is SQL Server Reporting Services. I can do things such as export this out to Excel or to a PDF file and so forth. But this is the way that normally a lot of users would interact with the data. It might look a little bit better than this, that the report might also include a chart instead of just this grid, but this is an example of a good way to deliver BI to a very broad audience and give them the information that they need. Similar to information workers are a special class of workers called analysts. And a lot of companies, people have the title of analyst, but I'm talking about the people who really do hardcore analytics against the data. Oftentimes these people have a background in statistics, and they have a need to look at the data in great detail and work with it. And this brings us to one of the most exciting areas of BI, and that is working with analytic applications. And the power that is brought forth by these applications is really pretty amazing. And so I'll show you an example of what one of those looks like. The good news is that you have several different ways or several different analytic applications from Microsoft that you can work with, and they each have their pros and cons, of course, and I'll be discussing those a little bit later in a future video. So with analytic applications, basically you have unfettered access to the data, and they have often very rich graphical tools for looking at the data and working with it. And you'll notice here there are 4 lists, or well, actually 3, ProClarity, Excel, and then Performance Point Server are listed as analytic applications. I'll show you an example of ProClarity, and future videos will cover ProClarity in depth. I'll also show you Excel 2007 and the analytics that come with Performance Point. But for now, let's take a look at a little bit of what ProClarity can do for you. And just be aware that for the time being for Microsoft, ProClarity does still exist as a separate product. That will change in the future, but again, I'll discuss that in future videos. Here you see an example of what is called ProClarity Professional or ProClarity Desktop Professional. This is a Windows application. There is a web-based application of ProClarity, but again, don't worry too much about that now. You'll have a chance to see all these tools in future videos. But notice here that I do have a chart, but it's a little bit richer than you might expect. For example, there are 2 measures here. There's a reseller sales amount and a gross profit margin. Since those numbers are vastly different, one's up in the millions and one is a percentage, so therefore less than 1, you you have two very different things, and therefore the margin, the percent, has been put on the right-hand side, whereas the value is on the left-hand side. And notice that I do have, for example, the ability to slice this data with a parameter, so I can drop this down and say, okay, show me information just for clothing, for example, and that changes accordingly. And you'll notice that the profits on clothing tend to run much higher. I have the ability to hover over this, and I get the actual values up at the top. I get a little tooltip with the true value with it and some additional information about this. I could do the same thing with the line, hover over that and see those actual values as well. With ProClarity, I also have the ability to simply click on the View button and cycle through a chart only, a grid only, or potentially something like this with a horizontal split, and now I can see the data in yet another way. In addition, I have the ability to drill up and drill down on data. For example, notice here I have time, and if I wanted to look at 2007 in greater detail, I could click on that, and here I see the semesters, the first and second half of the year. I could drill down further into the quarters, and then finally, for example, down into the months that make that up. I could continue going down, but that's far enough. You get the idea here. So that is the first report, the first view as they're called in ProClarity. The second one here is a much different view. This is actually showing you some interesting information. What you have here are the product subcategories, and the size of the box is determined by the sales amount, and the color is determined by the gross profit margin. So just because a box is large doesn't necessarily mean it's good. If you're selling a whole lot of something but losing money on it, that's something you want to indicate. And this particular view shows the data, or shows the color where bright green is good, bright red is bad, black is exactly in the middle. So you notice mountain bikes are close to the middle, and the gross profit margin there is 5.4% roughly. You'll notice that some of the brighter reds, for example, touring bikes is almost 12% negative, and jerseys are minus almost 23%. Some of the bright greens over here, you'll notice gross margins of nearly 35% there. This is an additional, in addition, this can be sliced by year as well, just like the previous report. And in fact, you can even group this. For example, I could group this and say, okay, now let's take a look and group this by the years, and then it's going to put up a box for each year to show me the data. It gets a little crowded with such small screen resolution, but you get the idea. So that's a very powerful tool as well. And of course, you see the tooltips as I move over these different blocks. The final view I'll show you here is one of the most popular in the ProClarity tool. This is called the decomposition tree, or decomp tree for short. Notice here I've started by analyzing all customers, and again I've just gone down to the country, much like the report that you saw earlier. Now within this country, for example, I could click and simply drill down to the state or province level, and notice that I don't have enough room to show them all, so it's stacking them up. At the end I can click on that stack and it deals some off that stack and start stacking them up at the bottom or at the front so that I get this middle layer. In addition, at the bottom I have a Pareto chart that shows me the relative sizes of all these. It's a little hard to see with California, so let me pull up the cities of California. And you'll notice here that the light color indicates the ones I can see, the dark colors are the ones that are in the stack, but they're still live. If I hover over this, I get a tooltip with the actual value, and if I click on that, then it deals out the stack accordingly so that I can see that. Now simply going down the geography chain would be useful enough, but for example, let me go back up to California and say, okay, I know if I click on this I'll see the cities, but what products are we selling in California? Well, that's one of the most powerful things. I can right click on this and choose any dimension, and so for example I can say show me the product categories that we're selling here, and it breaks it out. So these are just the sales for California, and that's the product category. If I click here, I'll go to the subcategories for that, and so forth. So I can actually move from one dimension to another. And one of the reasons people like this so much is that you can look back and see the whole history of where you've come from. And it's one of the few views that allows you to do that, unless you have a report where you're just continuing to expand and expand and expand and see all that. This is often a much more compact way of showing that. So this is an example of a very powerful analytics application. And you'll see all of this stuff eventually moving into some other Microsoft products. But for now, this is ProClarity. And there will be a whole series of videos on how to work with ProClarity. The next category of users to discuss are line workers. Now, line workers are the ones on the front lines, whether that is a clerk in a store dealing directly with customers, or someone working on an assembly line or what have you. It's someone who really is not in a position where they need to be analyzing data to any degree, but they can still benefit from the BI application because it can become just part of their day-to-day operations. So they may be using a BI solution and data from that solution without even realizing it. And often that's done through custom application integration. In other words, you build an application and simply include data from the BI solution in it. So you can imagine a salesperson who on a daily basis is taking orders, and when a customer calls in, it could pull up information about that customer, their entire order history, their average order size, all kinds of things from the BI application. In addition, you could have a salesperson out in the field. They're kind of a cross between a line worker and an information worker, but you could actually give them BI data every week for the customers they'll be seeing, and they can do a little bit of their own analysis on it. But let's take a look at some very simple custom application integration, and this will actually be done with some data mining, but you'll still see some of the benefits that you can achieve by using this BI data in line of business applications. Here are a couple of examples from the SQL Server Data Mining website. You'll notice it is just sqlserverdatamining.com, and this is a really good site. It's run by the data mining team at Microsoft, but it's not an official Microsoft site. The team runs this externally, and they've put up a number of samples and white papers and tutorials and so forth. It's an excellent site if you're interested in doing data mining. But they have some examples up, and the first one I'm going to show you, one of their examples, is a simple movie site. It's an online movie store, and you can go and pick a movie in which you're interested. And so, for example, I'll click on A Beautiful Mind, and it takes you to a page that contains information about the movie. But if I scroll down here, you'll notice at the bottom it says people who like this movie also liked, and then it has a list of other movies and links to those. Now this is actually done with some data mining. So basically it says of the universe of sales that have occurred when people buy this movie, what else do they buy and rate highly. So it gives you some statistics on that, or it uses some statistics to say, what items would be likely to be related if the person likes this. And you'll notice here that they actually show you what the query looks like in order to get back that results set that shows up. Very simple query in this case. This happens to be against a relational database and not a cube, but it doesn't matter. You can do data mining against either one. So that's a fairly simple example. It's a lot easier than just saying, would you like fries with that? It actually tries to use some intelligence to recommend other items. The second example I'll show you is again one of their examples, and it is a data entry form, but it uses the universe of known good data to try to validate data input. That's actually a very powerful concept. If you think about it, bad data always seems to have ways of getting into the system, but what this does is it assumes that the data that you have is good, and therefore any new input gets validated against that. So for example, I could come in and I could put that I'm a male and I'm 12 years old, and that I have, 7 years of education, and my occupation is that I'm a professional or technical person, and that I am currently the male head of household. And when I submit that, you'll notice it comes back and says, this doesn't really make sense against all the data that we've seen and know. And I can actually get additional information about this by looking at the details. And if I scroll down just a little bit, of course it has the query, but if I scroll down, you'll notice that it scores the likelihood of this data being valid. So I'll scroll back up here and fix this a little bit. Say, oh, okay, well, let's see. I'm not 12 actually. Let's put in 32, and we'll put in 12 years of education. Now, if I click accept, you'll notice that it does believe that would be possible information. So this again is just looking at new data that's trying to come in and scoring it against the likelihood of it being true, assuming that all the data that's already in the system is valid. So those are just a couple of examples of taking data that could be gleaned from a BI solution and feeding that back into applications that are just used day to day. And so the users of these systems may not even know that they're working with BI. Okay, the last set of users that I'll talk about are external customers and vendors. Basically anyone outside your organization who might benefit from accessing this data. And what's interesting is that everything I've shown you except the ProClarity Professional has been web-based. So I could make that accessible to the outside world. And in fact, there is a ProClarity product that will let me do everything you saw me doing before, but through a web browser. And the interface is slightly different. It's not quite as robust as the Windows application, but it still gives you almost all the same functionality. So if you want to make this data accessible, of course security is always there, and there will be videos that talk about how to secure all of this later. But basically the key is to have this available over the web. So the good news is that reporting services is completely web-based. There is again a piece of ProClarity that is web-based. Performance Point itself, the scorecards are completely web-based. The reports, there are some that are and some that aren't, but of course you would typically only use the ones that are web-based if that's the way you know you have to deliver it. And if you wanted to use Excel, there is now a SharePoint or a web-based version of Excel called Excel Services. So with all of these different tools, you do have ways of delivering this data so that it is available over the web and users still have a very rich access to it. And again, you can still secure that entire communication and lock them into only the data they should be able to see. So in closing, you've looked at a lot of information here. But really, the key is there are different types of users and how they interact with the data is completely different. Obviously, when you saw the scorecard and the data that it presented, and you compared that to what was in ProClarity Professional, completely different ways of working with the data. Same BI solution there, just different front-end tools for working with it. And of course, one is aimed at executives who don't have time to do their own analysis, and one is aimed at the analyst who, that's what they do, is sit there and analyze data at a very detailed level. So a very good variety of tools, and of course reports, they're targeted kind of right in the middle of that whole area. So very interesting in building BI solutions and working with these different front-end tools because they allow you to deliver to the end user just what they need in order to do their job.